Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for joining for the last plenary lecture. We'll have an introduction in a second, but before, I would like to take just a few minutes to award the Role Models in Economics Award, which is actually a new award that was introduced by the last year's president, Maristella Botticini. And the award in 2023, in the first inaugural year, was in store to recognize colleagues who are not just true scholars, but also outstanding contributors to the public good in the economics profession. And with the Role Models in Economics Award money, all recipients are asked to contribute to an initiative that, that fosters the careers of PhD students and junior faculty in Europe, which is one of the fundamental missions of the European Economic Association. Now, the Role Model Award is given every year, but in alternating years to different groups of people. In odd years, it's for candidates who are older than 45, and in even years, it's for candidates who are younger than 45. We had the award already in 2023. We couldn't give the award, and so we're going to give two awards today. Let me start with the inaugural 2023 award, which was awarded to Meg Meyer from Oxford. And here's the citation from the committee. Meg Meyer is a leading microeconomic theorist who has made several important and lasting contributions to organizational economics and industrial organization. And while reading through the nomination letters she received, when it comes to her contributions to the public good, they share one common thread. She mentors PhD students and nurtures the careers of junior colleagues. Meg has advised 37 PhD students in her 37 years since graduating from her own PhD program. Many postdocs are mentored by her, and they have become highly influential in their fields of expertise. The committee also noted that Meg was a co-founding member of ESSET, the European Summer Symposium in Economic Theory in Guernsey, which is one of the highest profile and highest quality economic theory events in Europe since the early 1990s. Under her leadership, generations of young economists have been invited to participate in this impactful conference. Please join me in congratulating Meg. Meg.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to receive this honor, and I want to start by thanking all the doctoral students and postdocs I've had the pleasure of advising and mentoring over the years. I look forward to continued such activities. I also want to thank not only Jan, but also Maristella, who was a driving force in creating this award, and I think it's a great thing, and I'm saying that not primarily as a recipient, but I care strongly about people who provide public goods, and I had the pleasure of serving on the committee this year that elected this year's winners, and it was just wonderful to see the range of activities in which are, the range of public goods that people are providing. I was asked to say very briefly how I've used the funds that came with the award, and I used it in two different ways. I gave half of the funds to the European Summer Symposium in Economic Theory, which, as Jan mentioned, I've been involved with for over 30 years. We used it to help fund the travel of 17 young theorists based in Europe. They came from all over Europe, and it was wonderful to be able to boost the participation of young economists in that event. I used the other half of the funds, minus the rather sizable international bank transfers fees, to energize Oxford's program for facilitating research visits for doctoral students. I'm sorry to admit that it's been a bit ad hoc at Oxford. which students visit depends a lot on the initiative of the supervisors, and we're setting up a fund that will systematize the process, that will ensure that the wisdom of how to organize research visits is passed on from generation to generation of students. And I'm delighted to say that I have proposed, and I'm optimistic that this will be accepted, to have the fund named after my role model, who was Jim Merlis, who was a wonderful support for the first 10 years of my career. So I'm delighted to be able to use those funds in these two ways.
Thank you very much, Meg. And then the 2024 award has been jointly given to Anna Salomons and David Schindler. Anna has become one of the driving scholars in the field of labor economics, in particular in the study of technology adoption and labor market outcomes. We'll hear more of that later. Her outstanding academic scholarship is coupled with her ability to share the knowledge and insights with both policymakers and a broader audience through interviews in national television, radio, and in newspapers. Anna, as noted by the award committee, has led by example, and when it comes to intuition building, especially in her recent role, institution building rather than intuition building, in her recent role as the director of the Utrecht School of Economics Research Institute. David Schindler is one of the most outstanding applied microeconomists in behavioral economics who explores boundedly rational behavior across various situations. He does so by using a range of methods, including lab and field experiments, as well as quasi-experimental methods using secondary data. David's unbounded energy when it comes to contributing to the public good is highlighted in one of the letters of endorsement. Since 2019, only 2 years after starting his appointment after the PhD, David has continuously served on junior hiring committees at Tilburg with incredible success. David contributed greatly to attracting some of the best young and junior economists from prestigious US institutions, including Stanford, Harvard, Northwestern to Europe, and thereby put Tilburg back on the map. David's contributions to creating a better academic environment extend beyond his own institution, as another letter of endorsement points out that David is the driving force behind a myriad of activities which are making the European job market for economists, the powerhouse for attracting the best junior talents to work in all European institutions and to help PhD students from European institutions succeed in the first and most challenging steps in their careers. David cannot be here. He does a lot for the public good, but he also has small children and he had to rush to Tilburg to pick up his children. But we have Anna here and she's going to pick up both awards.
Thank you so much. I'm incredibly honored and touched to be the recipient of this award and even more so to share it with the amazing David Schindler. I want to thank the award committee and I want to very much emphasize that this is a shared recognition for all my amazing colleagues and collaborators who've done the actual hard work, not only of nominating me, but also keeping it a secret, and for making my daily work just fun and incredibly rewarding. So Sarina Gens and Uli Siran and Maarten Goos, Emily Rademakers, Anna Oliveira and many others who've contributed from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. I've had a lot of support over my career from many people and their generosity has always stuck with me. David Autor is one of those people. So I'm just trying to pay it forward. I'm nowhere near equivalent, so I still have a lot of paying it forward to do. So I hope to live up to the spirit of this award. And I'm very inspired by what Meg is doing with her funds and hope to, together with David Schindler, also find very valuable ways to help young scholars advance their careers. Thank you.
I'm getting out of here and Anna is staying because she's now taking over.
I'm now taking over. It's official. Okay. Thank you again. So it's my great pleasure to introduce David Autor. It's a somewhat perverse pleasure because David hates these types of introductions and all the praise that comes with it. It makes him feel very awkward. So sorry, David. but I'm going to have to say that you're the most insightful and influential scholar of the labor market in the last decades. And this is not just me saying this, it's a direct quote from Larry Katz, who is probably the only American not prone to hyperbole. So you can take that without a grain of salt, okay? So David's most well known for his work on trade and technology. And also today, we're going to be treated to very exciting new insights on how automation is transforming the labor market. Very relevant today, both for science and for policy, given the advancing capabilities of AI. I've seen a preview of this. We've been discussing it a little bit over the past months. You're in for a real treat. So that's all I'll say. Now, since David doesn't like traditional introduction, I decided to mix it up a little bit and tell you some things, some more personal things about David, which you may not know yet. And I'm going to do that using the format of 2 truths and a lie. So if you're not familiar, that's where I'll tell you 2 things that are true about David and 1 thing I've made up, and then you can guess which one that is. Maybe he reveals it, maybe he doesn't, okay? So the first thing, so when you read one of his many inescapable papers, you may have noticed that his name is listed as David H. Autor. So the H stands for a very unusual middle name, namely Hieronymus, after the Dutch painter Hieronymus Bosch, because David's mom is a very avid painter, and she's a big fan of Hieronymus Bosch. That's 1. 2 is that David's rocket fuel are peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. He eats at least 1 a day. He even travels with them to international conferences, including this one. That's the 2nd. And the 3rd is that you might think, someone of David's stature, super accomplished, is going to be so organized in everything he does. And most of the time that's true, but he's also an adrenaline junkie. And the way I know that is because he's always working on his slides last minute, especially when, the more prominent the talk is. I'm kind of surprised you're not working on the slides right now as we speak. So that's the final fact about David. So having spread some information and some disinformation, let's get the session going. So David, you have, I think, about an hour. If there's time at the end for discussion, that would be great. You can ask questions, but let's foresee how the time goes with David's fascinating talk. Let's give him a big hand.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be invited. It's to be honored to be introduced by my esteemed co-author and friend, Anna Solomons. In fact, she has also been a contributor to this project because we've been discussing it for many weeks. This is joint work with Neil Thompson, who's a colleague of mine at the MIT Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory and the head of MIT Future Tech. And so the question we wanted to answer is, does automation replace experts or does it augment expertise? And the answer we came up with is yes. Let me explain. So I want you to start by thinking about the following 2 jobs, crossing guard and air traffic controller. These are basically the same job, right? The job is to prevent collisions between children and cars, planes and other planes, and so on. So basically, it's the same thing. But air traffic control or crossing guards make less than 1/4 of what air traffic controllers do. Why is that? Well, it's not because of social value, right? If we had to spend $130,000 in the United States to prevent our children from being run over on the way to school, we would presumably come up with that money. Even Americans who are pretty stingy when it comes to social welfare value our kids at over $150,000. So that would happen. The difference, of course, is expertise, right? To become a crossing guard in the United States requires no training or certification in any U.S. state. Any able-bodied adult can get that job. To become an air traffic controller requires years in air traffic control college and thousands of hours of apprenticeship. And so if the world suddenly needed more crossing guards, air traffic controllers could step in and do that job. If the world suddenly needed more air traffic controllers, crossing guards could not step in and do that job, okay? Expertise is critical here. Now, I want to emphasize that this occupation of air traffic controllers is highly exposed to technology, highly exposed to automation. In fact, this job wouldn't even exist without technology. An air traffic controller without, a GPS, a two-way radio, and a radar system is just a person standing in a field squinting at the sky, right? So highly exposed. A crossing guard is not at all exposed to technology. No risk that crossing guards are about to be replaced by artificial intelligence, right? Okay, why did I bring this point up? The world is very focused on exposure to technology. right? More than 40% of jobs are exposed to artificial intelligence. AI exposure is the new buzzword to just often talk about job losses. That's what it really means, apparently. Now, this is newspapers, but economists are not at all immune to the same form of pornography. Here's a number of papers that measure automation exposure, right? The famous Fry and Osborne paper, work by Brynjolfsson and Mitchell in Science, my own work with Daron Acemoglu, Joseph Hazel, and Pascual Restrepo, the recent paper in Science by Alundu and all, and my co-author, Neil Thompson, didn't want to be left out of the gallery of derision, so we put in a paper by him as well about AI exposure. And so there's lots and lots of work on exposure. And the question is, what does exposure mean? The thinking that exposure means that occupations and jobs and wages are at risk is oversimplified. Capital and labor are usually considered complements. So why do we assume here that automation is intrinsically problematic? An occupation or a task might be exposed to augmentation or to automation or both. The work that I recently did with Anna Solomons and Caroline Chin and Brian Segmiller makes that point, but there's a lot of work that considers how different forms of technology can both replace parts of work, add new pieces to work, and so how do we think about those tensions coherently? And the point I want to make in this lecture is, depending on which tasks are automated, automation could diminish or amplify the demand for human expertise. Expertise is going to be a key word here, so let me define it. Expertise means domain-specific knowledge or competency required to accomplish a particular goal. Now, for expertise to have market value, not all expertise has market value, you need two things. First, the goal it enables must itself have market value. So it's got to be data science, not stamp collecting. Second, the expertise must be scarce. Why must it be scarce? Well, to paraphrase the character Panic from the movie The Incredibles, when everyone is special, no one is special, right? If everyone is expert, no one is expert. So scarcity is intrinsic to expertise. If everybody can do it, it's no longer scarce. If everyone thinks they can drive, driving is not scarce. Okay, so now I want to talk to you about how this fits in with automation. So consider an occupation, and here its tasks are ranged from least expert to most expert, okay? From crossing guard to air traffic controller. And let's say the top third of those tasks, the top quarter, is automated away. So what happens? Well, first of all, labor productivity will rise, right? This job is now presumably more output per hour. The second thing will happen is that the average expertise requirements in this job will fall because the hard parts of it have just been taken away, done by machines. The third thing is employment could easily rise, right? Because productivity has risen and the expertise barriers have fallen. So it's easy for people to enter this form of work. And so wages might not rise, in fact, they could fall, right? Expertise is lowered, value output is higher, and yet many more people can do this job. Now consider the alternate case, right? Same job, but now we automate the least expert tasks in the occupation, right? Well, what happens? Labor productivity, again, goes up. Average expertise requirements are going to rise, right? You need more expertise, or at least you can have fewer inexpert people doing this work. The third thing is employment may not rise or could even fall if more expertise is required, right? It's not that there's more output, there's more productivity, and yet more people are not available necessarily to do that job. And so wages could actually rise. So I want to draw your attention to this distinction, right? Both of these things raise productivity, and yet this one could raise employment and lower wages, and this one could lower employment or not increase it and raise wages. Okay, so this is not just a fanciful scenario. Think of what happens when expert tasks are eliminated. So we call this figure blood taxi. These are taxi cabbies in London, right, protesting changes in the taxi industry. Why? Well, as many of you know, it used to take 34 months to master the knowledge to become a London cabbie, right? An incredible act of human memorization. Once GPS was introduced, phone-based routing, that expertise was economically irrelevant. Right? A friend of mine is a London taxi driver, and he says he thinks of his job as basically being a tour guide and an entertainer. Right? Now you might think, well, shouldn't taxi drivers be happy? After all, the hard part of their job has just been automated, right? Now they don't have to do this work of memorization. But of course, they're not happy. The reason they're not happy is that means anyone can do their job, right? And in fact, that's what started to happen with London cabbies until they unionized. Uber was undermining their wages, undermining their business, but employment was growing. In fact, here's some data on in the United States. This is the average cumulative wage change and employment change between 1980 and 2018 for almost all occupations. So wages have risen by 20%. Employment has risen by 50%. That's reflecting population growth. If you look at taxis and chauffeurs, right, wages have fallen in relative terms by 16%, and employment has risen by 250%. Right? That's the Uber effect. We don't have unions, so our taxi drivers didn't organize, but they were not happy about this. Consider alternatively the job of proofreader, right? Proofreader is a job that used to involve a lot of spell checking, a lot of formatting, a lot of really kind of mundane, tedious tasks that weren't very skilled but were very concentration intensive. Now proofreading is about writing, right? Because all of the mundane parts of proofreading are done by computers, right? The hard part that's left, maybe it'll be done by GPT soon enough, but until in these data go to 2018. Over the last 40 years, wages in that occupation have risen by nearly 50%, and employment has declined, right? A proofreader is now a more expert job because of automation. It's more valuable, and there are fewer of them. Maybe because there's fewer people capable of doing it, maybe because demand is satisfied by a smaller number, but wages have risen a lot. Okay, so I want to now frame these ideas more formally. I want to tell you how we measure them, and then I want to provide some evidence that they are relevant to thinking about these questions. So I'm going to walk you through actually some foundations of my model. I'm going to give you a formal explanation, and then I'm going to talk to you about how we actually measure expertise, and how we measure changes in expertise requirements of jobs, and then how we bring that to the data. And I promise you that this will be quite transparent, and there's nothing there. If you wanted some really intense econometrics, you should have been here for the last session, because you won't be getting that now. Okay, so here are the foundations of this model. Okay, so first, the tasks comprising an occupation are indivisible, right? Everything needs to be performed. So automating one set of tasks doesn't mean the other is irrelevant. In some sense, you would say they're complementary, right? So, if you automate the routing in a taxi, someone still has to drive it. If you were to automate the driving, someone would still have to route it. Eventually, you could automate both. But until that happens, and even then, they're still being accomplished. They're just being accomplished by machines, right? Okay, the second is accomplishing a task requires task-specific expertise, right? So air traffic controllers can be crossing guards, but not vice versa, right? So more specialized tasks require expertise specific to that task, but the expertise is downward compatible, right? An expert person can do an inexpert job, but not vice versa. Now, let's be clear, expertise is multidimensional. I'm going to frame it here as one-dimensional, but of course, there's expertise in many different specialties, and a medical doctor cannot be a plumber just because they have more education, et cetera, right? But we're going to think of it as one-dimensional here, but of course, it's multidimensional. The third is that automation is going to displace labor from some expert tasks. So there are things that require human expertise that will get automated. The fourth thing is that all occupations are going to have some generic tasks as well. Tasks that need to be done, but they're not subject to automation, right? So what those are can change over time, but at present there are things that may require physical dexterity, they may require multisensory interactions, they may require common sense, right? But you're gonna have to do them. You can think of it as, the supporting, the glue, right? The little tasks that need to get done along with your job just by showing up. Okay, so now let me formalize that. So in this model, this is talking about worker supply. So each worker has one efficiency unit of labor that she can supply to one occupation. Workers have different levels of expertise, JI, on the interval 0 to 1, and a worker of expertise J can perform, or JI, can perform any task j prime less than or equal to ji. Right, so you can, if your expertise is 0.5, you can perform tasks 0 through 0.5, but you can't perform task 0.5 plus epsilon. Workers are going to choose occupations to maximize their wage. They're not going to be able to subdivide their expertise across occupations, right? You're committed. You got to do all the, if you join an occupation, you got to do all the things that happen in that occupation. So there's going to be a mass of workers who are uniformly distributed across all expertise levels. So in other words, expertise in this model is not exogenously scarce. I'm not assuming that there are fewer experts than there are non-experts, but intuitively, there are always more potential crossing guards than there are air traffic controllers, right? So there's a one-to-one mapping, but of course, if demand suddenly rose for air traffic controllers, we'd have scarcity. If demand suddenly rose for crossing guards, we would not have scarcity because expertise is upwardly non-fungible. So let me give you an economic illustration of upwardly non-fungible. Russian stacking dolls, right? So you could think of all the big dolls contain all the little dolls, right? They're the more expert ones, and not vice versa, right? So expertise is like Russian stacking dolls. I got that out of Mankiw's textbook. Okay, so now occupations. Occupations are defined by the tasks that they employ. So occupation J requires expertise in tasks phi through J, right? Tasks are ordered by increasing expertise, and there's also generic tasks in every occupation that are on the interval 0 to phi. And those require no expertise, but they can't be automated. So there's expert tasks, there's generic tasks, and of course, as I said, the worker must perform all of those tasks, both the generic and the expert in their occupation. So an air traffic controller cannot outsource speaking to pilots to her less expert colleagues, right? You've got to do all the things in your job. Okay, so you can think of this, and then there's automation. So let me sort of illustrate what happens. So these tasks are ordered from 0 to 1. It's not actually important where the generic tasks are, just that they're in there. So if there's no automation, the worker does tasks from 0 to phi, and then and those are generic, and then they would do expert tasks from phi to j, whatever j is. So if this is occupation 0.8, they do tasks here. Then you have kappa, which is automation, and it will advance over time. And so as it advances, the worker, this set of tasks, so from phi to kappa j, is going to be automated, done by machines. The worker will continue to do these generic tasks, and the worker will continue to do these expert tasks, right? And they will still be squeezing their labor into those things, right? It's not, they don't get to, this is a worker level production function, right? It's not a question of firms substituting, okay. So what's important here is, so firms are always going to automate tasks as feasible. It's always going to be economically efficient to do so. Capital will be more productive than labor at its given price, so firms will always want to do that. Whether that's good or bad for wages is actually quite ambiguous, but I won't spend time on that. Once an expert task is automated, it no longer requires expertise. So the expertise demands of the job change. And once all expert tasks in occupation are automated, that occupation is fully generic, and anyone can do that job, right? So now anyone can drive a London taxi as an Uber driver. Okay, so the production is actually quite simple. This is a Cobb-Douglas production function, right? And it just has 3 segments, right? The generic tasks, the automated tasks, and the expert tasks. And the optimization problem is quite straightforward. Firms are essentially going to want to maximize output. We assume they make an epsilon profit on each unit of output. They can employ at most 1 machine per task. Labor will distribute itself evenly across the tasks in which it's in. That's just the nature of Cobb-Douglas. And then the automation occurs up to its limit. And labor and capital both be paid their marginal product. So nothing non-standard here. Okay. Occupational outputs are going to be combined into an aggregate good, right? So these things, so if we have a continuum J of occupations, the aggregate production function will just be a CES or Dixit-Stiglitz combination of those, and they'll all be gross complements. So if an occupation becomes more productive, total revenue to that occupation will rise, right? So this is not an immiseration through productivity model, right? This is a case where you get more productive, total revenue rises, not as one for one, and then you can create a price index for that as a function, and everyone will be paid in terms of the intermediate good that they produce. They will get the labor share in that intermediate good, and then it'll be divided by the price index as a function of the output of that occupation and the current level of automation, and the market clears. Okay. So let me explain what happens then and give you a full, some figures. Okay. So the key thing to notice here, and what makes this different from many models, is that workers are going to arbitrage wage differentials constrained by their own expertise endowments, right? So if a less expert occupation starts paying more, all the expert workers will flood into it. But if a more expert occupation starts paying more, the reverse will not occur, right? So more expert workers can always flow into less expert tasks. If all expert tasks in an occupation are automated, the occupation becomes generic, so it is essentially competed for by any worker can take that job. And so as an occupation goes from expert to generic, wages in that occupation cannot exceed the wage in any more expert occupation, right? Because the experts in that occupation will just come down and do the generic job. So the reason for that is inexpert labor is elastically supplied, right? No matter how productive a less expert job becomes, everyone can do it, they will flood in, and so it can't actually pay that high a wage in equilibrium because that's going to be competed away. Conversely, so that's expertise replacement, right? That was the first half of my question, to which the answer was yes. Here's the second, expertise augmentation. Less expert workers, J prime, can never flow upward into occupations J, where J is greater than J prime. And yet, as automation advances, the real value of more expert occupations will rise. Why is that? Well, two things. One, of course, output is rising. Everything's becoming more valuable because productivity is rising. But the other is the values of the output rise, but there's no way for more labor to flow into them, right? Because there's a scarcity of expertise as we go further and further up because we don't have this kind of stacking dolls thing. So the relative and real wages of remaining expertise will rise. And the cause is that expert labor is inelastically supplied, right? So labor can elastically flow towards low expertise, but inelastically flows towards high expertise jobs. So let me show you what this looks like pictorially. Okay, so what this is the state of automation is on the x-axis. The worker level output of an occupation, this is before any arbitrage, right? And then these occupations go from the one that is yellow is the least expert, the one that is blue is the most expert, and you see the color scheme. And so what happens is as automation advances, right, first productivity rises more in the less expert occupations. Why? They become more capital intensive more rapidly because they have a smaller number of expert tasks. And then that moves up the chain towards the middle and then towards the top. And finally, the output of the most expert occupation is greatest because that one is actually ultimately the most capital intensive. It has the largest number of expert tasks that can ultimately be automated up to the remaining amount. Now, I want to underscore one point that may not be intuitive to you. If I'm a worker, should I be happy? There's two things going on in this model. One is that as automation proceeds, labor share is falling, right? It's displacing tasks. On the other hand, capital intensity is rising. These two things are in tension, right? Do I want a more capital intensive job and to have my labor share fall simultaneously? The answer depends on how productive the capital is, actually. There's in general is another paper that is in progress that basically shows that essentially for most jobs, or depending on capital intensity, there's an intermediate point at which you're indifferent about more capital and loss of labor share. Beyond that, more capital that causes you to lose labor share reduces your wage. But below that, more capital and lower labor share raises your wage. Maybe that was irrelevant. Skip all that. Let's just rewind that tape. Okay, so what happens here is productivity is rising in these occupations. Okay, good. So if we didn't have labor mobility, right, if there was no arbitrage, and people were bound to their occupations, what would happen is first wages in low expertise occupations would rise above those in the middle, then the middle would rise above those in the low, and then eventually the highest expertise occupations would have the highest wages. So that's what would happen if everyone had specific labor that was not portable across activities. But because of arbitrage, what happens instead is that we have initial productivity growth in low expertise occupations, but people flow into them. And then there's a separation as middle expertise jobs pull away, and then they become generic as well. And ultimately what's happening is the most expert jobs are pulling away from the rest because their value is rising, and yet there's no arbitrage opportunity for people to move into them, right? So you can think of, over time, as, you can think of like pediatric oncologists, right? Very highly specialized occupation, right? Very little entry. Its productivity is not rising very fast, but the value of output is rising enormously because we're wealthier, we're willing to pay for that service, and there are only a couple people who can do it, right? So that's what's happening in this model. So just to summarize what the model implies, and what we're going to bring to the data, right? The first is that expert work will command higher wages than generic work. And that will be true even within education groups. It'll be true even within blue collar and white collar and service occupations. So expertise is related to, but not the same as education. Education is a broad skill set. Expertise is a much more specific skill set. The second is changes in the tasks in an occupation can raise or lower expertise demands, right? Adding tasks will lower expertise demands if the tasks that are added are inexpert. Removing tasks can raise expertise demands if removed tasks are inexpert. So let me make that clear. Removing tasks from your occupation can make it a more valuable occupation, not a less valuable one, right? It can go either way. Changes in occupations' expertise demands will have countervailing effects on wages and employment, right? An increase in expertise demands will raise wages, but it will tend to reduce relative employment because there's no labor arbitrage opportunity, because it's hard for people to flow upward. A fall in expertise demand will reduce wages and raise employment simultaneously, or at least plausibly, because people will flow in as productivity rises. So labor arbitrage, again, is key. Inexpert labor supply is elastic. Expert labor supply is inelastic. That's the intuition. Okay, great. So what matters is not the quantity of tasks that you gain or lose, but the expertise of those tasks, right? All right, great. So now, how do we go about measuring this? So what we want to do is measure how much expertise a job requires, which tasks have been removed from and added to an occupation. We want to quantify the change in expertise requirements due to task removal and addition. We want to distinguish between the quantity and the expertise content, and we want to link them to wages and employment changes by occupation. So, the first part is measuring expertise. So measuring expertise, what we're going to do is we're going to draw on an insight from linguistics. So probably all of you have heard of Zipf's law. Many of you may not know, I know I did not know, that it actually comes out of linguistics, and it describes the frequency of occurrence of different words. And it's known as the brevity law, which says that frequently used words tend to be shorter than rare words. This is also known in neuroscience as the efficient coding hypothesis. It's empirically verified for thousands of languages, and it's related to the principle of least effort. Language is going to find the path of least resistance, and so there's a trade-off between the cost of verbalizing against the benefits of maximizing transmission success. Or you can think of like water, language is like a river that runs over stones, and the stones that it goes over frequently will be worn down and made smooth, right? That's how language actually works. And so an implication is that specialized words, such as those used by experts, will be longer, less frequent than words denoting generic common tasks. So why is this relevant to us? We're going to measure expertise demands using task descriptions of occupations, and the familiar terms are going to be short and simple, and they will be non-expert terms. Tasks that are comprised by rare and complex words will be more expert. Now, that may sound like pretentious people get paid more, But I'll show you that this has content. Pretentious people do get paid more, but that's not necessarily the reason. So how will we use this deep body of theory? We will use the Dale-Chal readability metric to measure expertise requirements. So just to demystify this a little bit, Dale-Chal is a list of about 4,000 words that are familiar to 8th graders. And the Dale-Chal score of a sentence, or at least the version we're going to use, is the fraction of words that are not in that list, right? So we calculate the number of words in the Dale-Chal list, the number of words, take that ratio, subtract it from 1, and that gives you the Dale-Chal index of readability. So let me give you a little explainer just to make this clear. Dale-Chal is not Dal-Chili, okay? It's these folks, Edgar Dale and Jean Chal, seen here in 1945 in the now famous photograph. Okay, so that's the Dale-Chal readability score. How do we do this? The ingredients for our Dale-Chal is we take textual job descriptions from the 1977 Dictionary of Occupational Titles and the 2018 Occupational Information Network, both of which describe the tasks and jobs. Now, they use different language, right? These things were not meant to be compatible, and so we're going to have to use tools to figure out what's new and what's old. But let me give you some examples of how surprisingly well this works. So here are some tasks. These are high expertise tasks as measured by Dale-Chal, right? Initiates promotions within departments. That has a DCC of 100%. Disassembles units to locate defects at 80%. Operate magnetic resonance imaging scanners, 100%. Install network software, including security or firewall software, 88%. Let me show you some inexpert tasks according to this measure. Right? Empties trash collecting box or bag at the end of its shift, 9%. Print and make copies of work, 0%. Butters bread and places meat or filling and garnish, such as chopped or sliced onion and lettuce between bread slices, 5%. So I think that's a great example, right? That's a long sentence. It sounds quite involved, right? But all the words are incredibly common. So it's actually a low complexity job description. Announces stuff to passengers. Okay, so let me show you what this looks like. So the source we're going to use for employment and earnings data, this is harmonized census data for 1980 to 2018. This is from my recent paper with Anna Solomons, Carolyn Chin, who's a PhD student at MIT, and Brian Segmiller, who's an assistant professor at the Kellogg School. So we're just going to use data for 306 consistent occupations over 4 decades. We're also going to use another measure from that paper about the flow of new job titles to validate what we're doing. Okay. So this is a scatter plot with no other covariates of the relationship between Dale-Chal complexity, DCC, and log hourly wages in 1980 and 2018. So you can see actually, it's a very well estimated relationship, right? It's just obviously a bivariate regression. The R squared actually rises. The return to Dale-Chaliness has apparently risen over time. And you can see, like, at the top of this, you might see aerospace engineers, you might see millwrights, accountants. At the bottom, you would see cashiers, retail salespersons. We've used different occupations in different years just to illustrate the variety. So you might say, okay, is this just a proxy for education? So here is the same regression where we control for high school dropout, high school graduate, some college, college graduate, greater than college, right? And it does reduce those slopes by about 1/3, right? But it's still actually extremely well determined, right? So this is not simply picking up something that's proxied by education. So you might say, okay, well, maybe you're just comparing blue-collar occupations to white-collar occupations, for example. So here's the same scatter, since I've given it away, I'll come back. So here's the same scatter plot for clerical and administrative workers, construction mechanics, managers. So these are 6 occupations. Here's another 6. These make up all of the US economy. And you can see in about 9 of 12 of these are well-determined positive slopes. Within those occupations, things that have more expert tasks as we measure them appear to be paid better. And just to give you some examples of what this actually looks like, here's an amazing table that you can't read. Here's a subset of the table. So here are service occupations. Oh, okay. Okay, that's okay. I thought it had hyperspace there. Okay, so this is service occupation. Housekeepers and cleaners versus cleaning and building supervisors, right? Dale Chall, 26%, 45%, and a 67% wage differential. Clerical workers, mail clerks outside the post office versus insurance adjusters, right? Twice as high complexity, 45% wage differential. Licensed practical nurses versus engineering technicians, right? Significant complexity difference, significant wage difference. Some of that may be sexism, let's be clear. Finally, advertising and related jobs versus economists and marketers. Whew, all's right with the world, right? Big wage differential. Okay, but these are occupations within the same category. These are not, totally, this is not apples and oranges. This is kind of, apples and pears, which I don't like. Okay, all right, great. So that's how we measure expertise. So that's one of the things we measure. The next thing we need to measure is tasks that are removed and added, right? So we can look at changes in expertise within jobs. Here's how we do that. We take these task descriptions and we turn them into embeddings using the 1536 dimensional vector from OpenAI's text embedding 3 small, right? So 1536 dimensions, small. And then for each task, in 1977 and 2018, we identify the nearest tasks from the other year. So let me make this clear. So these are, the red dots are tasks from 77. The blue dots are black dots, tasks for 2018. We form a radius around them each in these 1536 dimensions, here reduced to 2. And if 2 tasks are within the same radius, we say they're the same task. But if we have a task here that from 2018 that has nothing close to it, or a task here from 19, so these are new because they're there in 2018, but they have nothing close to them from 77. These are tasks that are removed because they exist in 1977, but they have no counterpart in this space in 2018. We use a very simple threshold to determine how big that radius should be. It's actually quite straightforward and robust. And so what we say is tasks that are found in 1977 and are not found in 2018 have been removed. And tasks that are found in 2018 but were not there in 1977 have been added, right? So very direct measure. So let me give you an example. Here's file clerks in 1977 and 2018. So the blue tasks are matched. Reads incoming material, scans or reads incoming material. And I give you these examples to show you that these are not the same words, right? Our embedding, right, is finding matches that don't have the identical language, right? So places material in file cabinet, places storage board, and here's one that says computerized reports versus file folders, right? Those are determined to be the same. Here's one that was present in 77, operate keyboard or punch card, missing in 2018. Here's one in 2018, input data into computer systems to support document and information retrieval, not present, right? So it actually, it works remarkably well. Okay, so let me just define our measures here. So first of all, we're going to get the task added and task removed in occupations is just a fraction. What fraction of its tasks were removed between 77 and 2018, and how many were added as a ratio to what was initially there, right? So that's the delta tau. Then we're going to calculate the change in expertise due to task addition and task removal. So for example, if tasks are added, we calculate their complexity. It could be above or below what was already there, right? And we multiply it by this fraction. That gives you the marginal contribution to the mean, actually, by multiplying by the fraction of change. We do the same thing for tasks removed, right? So tasks removed, this number could be positive or negative. If simple tasks are removed, this raises your DC. If complex tasks are removed, this lowers your DC, right? So there's nothing that imposes that removal is bad and addition is good. We can also calculate the net change. So we can calculate the net task change and the net complexity change. I mention this because I'm going to show you each of these components, right? And I'm going to show you the effect of removing tasks and show you they could raise or lower wages. I'm going to show you the effect of adding tasks to show you could raise or lower wages. I'm going to show you complementary results on employment. And I'm ultimately going to run a horse race between complexity and tasks themselves. Okay. So let me give you an example of what this looks like. So here are typists in 1977, 2018. Here are some tasks that were removed from the typist occupation. typing messages heard through earphones, reading charts, pressing buttons, pasting messages, reading income messages to detect errors, and pressing levers to stop transcription, right? This is a transcription occupation. Here are some of the tasks that remain. Type letters, compile data, and operate typewriter, may operate duplicating machines, may sort mail. So you get the feeling, right, that this occupation has actually become simplified because of automation. Now, let's take another occupation in the same sort of family, which is statistical clerks, right? Also clerical workers who work with information. So here are some of the tasks that have been removed. Compiling names, recording figures shown on dial and measuring wheels of planimeter, and subtracting them, posting files and charts, right? Those are a lot of repetitive tasks. What remains? Applying standardized mathematical formulas, conferring with professional scientific and engineering personnel, analyzing and processing data to detect errors, right? So the same act of automation, right, can mean expertise downgrading for one set of people, and expertise upgrading for other set of people, right? You may wonder, like, why over the last 20 years of your academic career, if you've had the good fortune to have 20 years, and if you haven't, you have the good fortune to have 20 more years ahead, why have clerical workers who used to be abundant, why are there so many fewer of them? And why are you doing your own typing, right? Well, it turned out that automation and word processing actually decontented a very skilled activity and basically allowed you to focus more on what you're productive at, which is writing. And typing is now an input into thinking, right? So the same automation has different implications depending if it's more or less expert for what you do. Okay, so just to give you a sense of tasks removed, tasks added, we see a lot of churn, and this is something we show in the paper with Anna and Caroline Chin and Brian Segmiller as well, that many of the places that are losing tasks are the ones that are gaining tasks as well. There's a lot of churn. So we have the most tasks removed and added in professional occupations, managerial, technician. We lose a lot of tasks from production operative. This is partly because of the historical nature of the data. There's actually a fair amount of tasks added in personal services, right, which are growing, which provide so many things that, so many forms of leisure and entertainment and hospitality. Okay, so just one final validation before I go to the results, and the results will go by quickly. To test whether our measure of adding tasks has some empirical validity, we simply did a regression. This is from the Autor, Chin, Salomon, Siegmiller paper, where we look at the flow of new titles measured by the Census Bureau added to occupations. That's a count variable. So we just look at the log. We don't take the log to 0. And so we just throw those out and relate it to the new tasks added. And you can see there's quite a well-determined relationship here. It is the case that occupations that by this set of data appear to be adding tasks are simultaneously the ones that are getting new titles. Right? And in fact, that's a lot of what you see is new tasks are often, associated with, it might be with, adding energy components or, working with new technologies, et cetera. Here's a scatter plot of the same. Okay, all right. So that's the setup. The results will not, are going to sort of try to describe that. But let me, so the first thing I want to talk about is overall changes in expertise requirements and changes in wages and employment. So here is the first regression, right? So what we do here is we just regress the change in the log wage, the average log wage with an occupation, there's just 304 observations here, on the change in Dal-Chol complexity due to task removal and task addition between 1980 and 2018. Now, I don't want to claim this is overwhelming evidence, right? This is the very first cut, all done within the last 72 hours. And this is the change in the complexity, and this is the change in wage. But I want to emphasize here is these are not, this X variable is not demeaned. Some occupations are becoming more complex and losing in relative terms, and some occupations are becoming, less complex, some are becoming more complex, and both of those things are associated with wage change, right? You might ask yourself, okay, why are wages changing? Is it because people are getting a premium for being in a more complex job, or they're getting punished for doing a simpler job, or is it actually because skill requirements are changing? So a very simple way to answer that question is do a cross-sectional wage regression in each year and estimate a basic Mincer regression as a function of education, experience, some demographics if you want to put them in, and then you predict the wage in each occupation, removing the residual, right? What would you expect that occupation to pay? And that's a kind of a single index of the skill. And then you can look at how the predicted wage in an occupation changes as a function of the people who are in it. And that's a single index of the change in expertise in an occupation, right? If the predicted wages in an occupation rise, that says that the characteristics of workers in that occupation are changing in a way that are towards higher paid people, right? It's not about a pay premium. It subtracts the pay premium. It's the pure composite skill-adjusted wage. So what we find, and I think this is quite sensible, is about 2/3 of this increase in wages is associated with an increase in expertise in the jobs, right? As these jobs become more expert, the skill levels of people in them rise. Or another way of saying it is the less skilled people exit, right? So it doesn't have to be a wage premium. It's simply consistent with the idea that the occupations have become more demanding. So the next prediction I want to turn to is employment. And I think this is the most distinctive prediction of this framework, which says, look, when expertise rises, you might think wages will rise, employment should rise, right? Demand shift. The opposite is true, right? When expertise requirements rise, employment falls in relative terms, right? So as these occupations become more skill demanding, wages rise, the expertise composition of workers increases, and relative employment falls. They grow less, right? They're like those proofreaders. So we were pretty startled by that. So just to demonstrate to you that this is a reasonably well-founded set of results, I want to now do this separately for task addition and task subtraction, right? Because I think the strongest prediction is that tasks subtracted from your job can make the job more expert, higher paid, and smaller, right? And so I want to actually separate these two components into addition versus subtraction. So here is a relationship between complexity change due to task removal, right? And these jobs become more complex because tasks are removed and wages grow. And these become less complex because tasks removed and wages fall. Here is, let's see, and here's the same thing for the predicted wage, the expertise component. And again, you see something similar. Tasks are removed, the job becomes more complex, the skill levels of people doing that job rise, arguably the less skilled people leave. Now it turns out that task addition and task removal are not strongly positively correlated, so it's legitimate to do these one by one. So here's the same thing for task addition. And again, we see if you add tasks that are more complex, wages rise. If you add tasks that are less complex, wages fall. Same for predicted skill level. And then if we do that finally for employment, it's not as precisely estimated, but again, you see the same relationship. So it's actually kind of symmetric for making jobs more complex or less complex. You can do it either way, right? You can make it more complex by taking things away. You can make it more complex by adding stuff. And you can make it less complex by taking things away or by adding stuff. Okay, so as a final, my watch has stopped. Either that or time has stopped. So you might say, look, there's a lot of work, including work that I've contributed to, that says, you want more tasks, not less tasks, or fewer tasks, depending on your linguistic preferences. And the question is it just tasks or is it expertise? Do you just want to do more stuff or does it matter what you do? And so we can run a very simple horse race of that by just running the change in wages on complexity and task change simultaneously. So it is the case that holding changes in task count constant, complexity predicts wage increases. Holding complexity constant, increases in task predicts wage increases. This is not so much true for task removal. That's also true, by the way, if we look at expertise levels themselves, so the skill level of workers, right? However, there's a really crucial distinction, right? Which is when I look at employment, right? Increasing complexity predicts a fall in employment. Increasing tasks predicts a rise in employment, right? So increase in tasks look a lot like demand shifts, whereas increases in complexity look a lot like changes in expertise requirements. And so I do think these things are distinct, and it's a meaningful distinction. So let me just conclude. So automation both replaces and augments expertise, as I said at the very beginning, right? So the answer to which does it do is yes, right? The relevant question is not how many tasks, but which tasks are you doing? The focus on exposure to automation or to AI is misplaced, right? Why don't grocery clerks make high wages? After all, they become massively more productive by scanning stuff, right? Why doesn't everyone become a pediatric oncologist? Those pay really well, right? The answer is, of course, the one-way fungibility of expertise, right? It's easy to move into inexpert work. It's hard to move into expert work. Of course, it's not perfectly inelastic, but in the short run, there are very significant supply constraints that run in one direction, but not the other. So many theories of job exposure fail to predict the past, right? If you looked at economists and clerical workers and said, wow, they're both really exposed to computers, I guess they're screwed, right? You would have been only half right, right? Because the same act of automation has very different implications for those two. So things that don't predict the past well are not well equipped to predict the future. And so if we want a model for thinking about how the change in the nature of tasks due to automation, due to artificial intelligence, is going to interact with the labor market, we need a theory that can accommodate what tasks are removed, what are added, and how that changes the contents of jobs. So our hope is that applying this approach about thinking carefully about expertise will allow us to make a better prediction going forward in terms of how the changes that are ahead of us will change the nature of work. And I do not think, by the way, that it'll be similar to what we've seen. And many of what we would think of as the more expert tasks may be more subject to automation replacement. And that will change both the wages, but also the employment opportunities. And frankly, if a lot more jobs lose their most expert tasks so that more workers can flow upward into them, which doesn't happen in the current version of the model, that could be a very good thing for opportunity. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very, very much for inviting me. Oh. And I nearly forgot, I want to acknowledge 5 people who've contributed enormously to this project. Anna Solomons, I've already mentioned them, but Lucy Hampton, Joanne Lang, Christian Foote, and John Yeseldier, all of whom worked as research assistants on this project. So thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much, David. I learned a lot from that. Okay, I think we'll open the floor to some questions. We have about 10 minutes. I also have some questions in case you guys want to think about it a bit, but we have microphones here to pass around. Yeah.
Thanks, David. Really beautiful figures. You did a great job there. As far as I understand, your complexity measure is very much based on the sophistication of the task description.
That's correct.
Have you also thought about the centrality in the job network? So if this task also is appearing already in other job descriptions versus if it's really unique to this specific job in terms of paying higher wages?
Right, great question. So yeah, so so what we're doing is it's amazingly bare bones, right? The miracle is that it works at all. And I will say that my co-author Neil Thompson, who proposed this, I said, that's not going to work. That's a bad idea. And then when it worked, I said, it's still a bad idea. Let's find an alternative. So the fact that it's still here means we couldn't do any better. That's my failure. But it doesn't speak to centrality, nor does it speak to the type of tasks. Right, so you could have a interactive or interpersonal task that's extremely complex. You could have a technical task that's very complex, and our measure can't tell those apart. But that's a valuable direction to go. I also say that, in fact, we're only using tasks that have been removed or added from the economy. not from individual occupations so far, because when we did it at the occupation level, it was too noisy. So we're only confident enough about addition or removal when we see it gone altogether from one or the other. So in some sense, that totally skips the question of centrality.
Maybe if I can just follow up on that,
Yeah,
because I was also sort of wondering, so, you know, your framework has a very specific way of thinking about removal of tasks, but it sort of also still, I think, begs the question of why are which tasks added in what place, and also sort of relating to what Sabrina was saying between occupations, right? So the example you were giving of typists, right, and the introduction of computers and software for that, you know, of course, it doesn't mean no typing is happening anymore. It's just the professionals are not doing the typing themselves. So kind of in the tug of war over that task, professionals won and typists lost. And that's, I think, because the complementarity between ideation and writing that you could sort of now unlock that you couldn't before.
Right.
So sort of thinking about how you think about that, and then I'm going to even make it more complicated and ask you sort of also to relate that maybe to what you were predicting about AI, just to give you an opportunity to be wrong for your next presentation.
Okay, good. So right? So there's three questions in there. The first one is, what predicts which tasks are removed? And this is something we started to work on, and I developed some instruments about tasks, but I decided to leave it alone for now because I wasn't confident in it. But obviously you could say, look, these are certain types of tasks are going to be more susceptible, right? Things that are more routine intensive, for example, over a certain period. And so you could use initial task composition as a predictor of what will be removed. And that's something we will definitely explore. Then there is the question of, you know, statically you might say, well, this occupation does this and this one doesn't, but obviously those can be re-optimized. And so this is a very static view of what needs to be in an occupation, or it doesn't deal with the endogeneity of what shows up where. And I think that's completely correct. And I do think those things are both economically determined and socially determined, right? Like you see this in medicine all the time, right? Doctors fighting with nurse practitioners about who gets to draw blood or who gets to do a certain test, right? In the United States, for example, dental hygienists, those are dental assistants, are not allowed to fill cavities even though they're capable of doing so, except in northern Alaska, where dentists don't want to go. It's safe for them to do it there, right? So obviously these boundaries are, socially determined as well as economically determined. So I think that's a really deep question. There's a beautiful paper by Autor de San and Tana Santos that I've been teaching for years called Adaptive Organizations, and it's about how tasks are bundled. And when do you want to put things together, create broad jobs with lots of discretion, and when do you want to break them apart into narrow tasks and remove all discretion? And so that's definitely a valuable direction to go. I don't have an answer, but it's a lot of filibustering. And then the third question was thinking about tasks of the future. So, our last 4 decades, my, understanding has been very much defined by taking tasks that are codifiable, that are routine, and automating them, because that's what symbolic processing was really good for, executing rules and operating tools. But the AI era is quite different. We have machines that actually are terrible at routine tasks. They can't do math. They can't keep facts straight, right? But they can learn inductively. They can make good guesses. They can discover and recognize patterns that we don't see, right? And so a lot of those tasks are actually what we would think of as expert decision-making tasks, right? And the opportunity, in my opinion, or the possibility, is that AI will allow more people to do expert decision-making tasks. Now you might say, well, doesn't that mean they will become generic? It doesn't necessarily mean that. It depends what remains, right? I would be happy to live in a world where people needed less education to be doctors and more people could be doctors. Yes, the wages of doctors would fall a bit, but the price times quantity would increase a lot, and a lot more people get medical care, which is probably more important than either of them, right? So all these acts of automation, by the way, are good for consumers, right? But most consumers get their income for consumption from labor, so we think about it both ways.
Great. We probably have time for one more question or two more. Yeah, let's go.
It's been touched on a little bit already, but I was going to ask from an endogenous growth perspective. It seems, there is a prediction there which tasks are most valuable to be automated, right? So have you explored that version where the decision what technology can do is endogenous?
Interesting. That's a good question. That's a super good question. So, you know, in I mean, a short answer is no. I haven't thought about that at all. A longer answer is that, you know, in the initial equilibrium of our model, actually everyone earns the same wage and produces the same output, right? There's no differentiation. Expert and inexpert jobs are equally valuable. Initially, where would you want to? You would actually want to automate at the bottom because the task, since all the tasks are stacking dolls, right, you always want to automate the most prevalent task, which is actually what's happening in our model, right, the one that's common to the largest number of occupations. Now, but of course, eventually you could say, well, there's a quantity effect and there's a price effect, and when those expert occupations become more expensive, that's where you want to target your automation. Right? And you know, you could say like the period that we've been living in since the end of the Second World War is one where we've gotten really good at automating physical productive tasks, right, and repetitive tasks. So you know, a lot of our income growth has to, you know, bigger cars, televisions the size of houses, right, houses the size of skyscrapers, and you know, more and more consumption. But we've not gotten good at all the stuff that's now expensive: medical services, education, software development, design, law, engineering, right? Not much productivity growth. So this is a moment where you'd like to target automation, or at least technology in that direction, and that's actually where AI will prove most useful, right? So you would much rather have a 5% increase in the productivity of healthcare than a 5% increase in the productivity of making refrigerators, because healthcare is just a much bigger part of the economy, right? So, it is interesting, and maybe it's not a coincidence, right, that is where the new form of technological progress may prove most relevant.
Great. We have time for one more question, if there is one. Okay, I think that means all questions have been answered. I think that was a great note to end on. I won't keep you all hostage. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, David, for that incredibly insightful talk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. All right.